everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Lindsay Hendrick, and I'm the Executive Director of the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the Niagara Chamber Partnership, which includes Fort Erie, Grimsby, Lincoln, Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Thorold, Port Colborne, Wainfleet, Welland, Pelham, and West Lincoln Chambers, I'm thrilled that all of you are able to join us this morning for our third informative session discussing the financial forecast in Niagara. Throughout the past few weeks, we have been bringing you some fantastic conversations with industry leaders from 6 different sectors. I want to thank our tech sponsor, B4 Networks, and provide a special thank you to John Armstrong from Armstrong Communications, a longtime champion for our local chambers as a moderator for the series. John, I'm so sorry I butchered your name there.
It is a tricky name.
Over to you, John.
Thank you, Lindsay. It definitely is a tricky name. I get asked how to spell it all the time. Welcome everybody. We're here today, as Lindsay said, to talk about the economic forecast for Niagara. We are joined today with 3 really terrific guests. David Csordas is the Senior Account Manager for the Business Development Bank of Canada. A Senior Account Manager for the Business Development Bank of Canada. Patricia Suess is a Senior Manager for the accounting firm Durward Jones Barkwell. And Stephen Tapp is the Chief Economist for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So why don't we just start off going around the table? Let's start nationally and then work our way down locally. And Stephen, perhaps you could kick us off and say and provide some context from a national perspective where the country is in. I couldn't necessarily say it's well, perhaps it's our economic recovery, but where do we sit from an economic perspective and as it relates to the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I would say that the impact of the pandemic has obviously been very big on people's economic and social lives. When you look back through the early lockdowns, we had about, in terms of the business side, about 70% of companies through the Canadian survey of business conditions said that their revenues had been hit. So about 70% of companies there's not any recession. There's been no no precedent, no parallel in terms of events that have happened before COVID that would impact that many companies in that way. And we had about 1 in 4 companies that had pretty catastrophic revenue declines of 50% or more. So it's pretty big in terms of the impacts that we've seen. Things were obviously very bad during the initial lockdowns in March and April of last year. As sort of expectations improved, conditions started to be loosened up and vaccine mandates came out, the Canadian economy began to recover. So we are not back exactly at where we were beforehand in terms of overall output, but the expectation is that demand has increased quite a lot. And the big issue that we're having now nationally is with these supply constraints. So people are having difficulties in terms of labor shortages. A lot of companies are looking to hire workers, but they're having difficulty finding workers with the right mix of skills. We're having supply chain bottlenecks. So there are difficulties with semiconductors have just been one of few, but difficulties with acquiring inputs and rising costs all around. So I think right now we're kind of at a point where I wouldn't say we're at a full recovery, but we're certainly doing a lot better than we were doing last year. Expectations for growth are pretty good, and the economy is now just sort of struggling through this episodic. How do we get back to some kind of new normal?
Yeah, so certainly we're starting to recover, but as you pointed out, the economy is still in significant flux. There's a lot of change that's actually happened and is currently happening as well. Wouldn't mind, just before we ask the others what their perspectives. How much of the kind of supply chain and how much of the flux is related to the changing buying habits that Canadians have gone through the pandemic? I mean, I was reading, it was an American publication, that it was when the service sector and the tourism sector was really shut down, people with disposable income continued to spend, and that spending though was geared towards products, and that's what was a real augmenter to an impact on the supply chain. It wasn't that necessarily that there were shortages overseas in terms of disruptions in their economies, but it's a little bit of that combined with expanded demand. Is that the kind of thing that we've seen that's caused this kind of this flux that still needs to balance?
Yeah, there have been pretty big differentials in terms of the service sector and the goods side of the economy. So as you're right, anything that was a high touch, high contact service job. So think about restaurants, hotel, in person, anything that's kind of in person, like hairdressing, chiropractor, those types of things, they have been disproportionately hit. And of course, there was a very big impact on the labor market, but we had a very large policy response from government, not just only through the CERB, which was sending money directly to individuals, but also through a wage subsidy program, rent subsidy programs. And so this was a bit atypical in the sense that normally in a recession, you have overall aggregate income going down. At this point in time, we had wage income going down, but government transfers going up, and then people actually on net, although it varied across income distribution, but on net, savings were accumulating in terms of the household sector. So as you pointed out, people were stuck in lockdown. They didn't necessarily, or were not able to safely go out and go to restaurants. They were not going to patios. They were not doing tourist activities. And so a lot of that activity shifted online. A lot of it moved to the goods sector. People were buying things for their homes. The housing market in general, the housing market took off as people were looking for office space at home, as everybody's kind of stuck work from home. So there was the pressures there were essentially taking savings that households had, moving them towards the goods sector, away from services. And so that is in part has been leading to these pressures that we said in terms of overall supply chains and just real changes in terms of people's behaviors and what they're able to buy in terms of just getting out there and being able to purchase things.
So David, what are you feeling from the BDC perspective in terms of the stresses and the flux in the economy as it relates to business?
Thanks, John. I have to agree with everything that Stephen just brought up, and we have our own kind of internal resources and economists, and everything is heading in a positive direction. Canadian exports are recovering. They're almost back to 53 billion as of July, from a low of about 32 billion back in April. Things are, from the BDC perspective, things are going relatively well. There's strong economic growth is forecast, 2021 and 2022 as far as annual GDP growth. Our latest study has shown that 3/4 of SMEs are profitable, but obviously the pandemic is still causing difficulties.
What are you feeling on the ground? What are you feeling on the ground locally when you're talking to businesses?
Business investment is recovering. Obviously, when the pandemic first hit, for the first 6 months, people just held back on everything. And then just to see how how it was going to shake out, and the uncertainty that everyone talks about. For the most part, a lot of businesses, save for in our area, which is big in agritourism, manufacturers and everything weren't, as hit maybe as hard as they thought they were. And a lot of them managed to, be flexible and pivot and, find other revenue streams. So they are now, on the ground as of late, people are looking to buy commercial real estate. Interest rates are low. They're purchasing, machinery and equipment to help with production. And automation is a big thing these days, which will, again, as Stephen mentioned, help with the labor shortage issues and such. So businesses are now investing money in their businesses.
Patricia, what about from Durward Jones, Barkwell's perspective? How are your clients feeling about business prospects and the economy looking forward?
I think since the pandemic has started, there's been a lot of government assistance available that has kind of bridge the gap. And I think as these subsidies and access to these programs end at the end of this month, so the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy, the last, it goes to October 24th, and it hasn't been, there's no word if it's been renewed yet. The government can renew it till the 30th of November, but past that, it has to go through Parliament, and new legislation would have to be given out. And the personal benefits like CERB and like CERS and all the whatever acronyms that we're all super familiar with now, and at the end of this month as well. So I think that will be the real test of how businesses are doing. Like, it's been very interesting from my perspective, seeing which clients are thriving in a pandemic and which clients are literally trying to survive. There's obviously the like restaurant tourism industry are getting hit really, really terribly. But then there's other industries like construction and manufacturing that are actually thriving in the pandemic. And because of people's buying habits, they're actually doing well as being eligible to access some of these subsidies. So the real test, I think, will be like once the government, what they will offer after the subsidies are cut off, whether they just cut them off and expect them to move forward, or if new programs will be introduced. I don't know about that yet. And kind of like what Stephen was saying with like people's buying habits. It was like at the beginning of the pandemic, I saw a lot of like charities and nonprofits and people trying to support restaurants. So there was a big like influx in those industries, which has really died off. I think it's kind of like pandemic fatigue. People are like, at the beginning it was rah, rah, support. And now it's just like, I'm done with this. I'm done. So you've seen those kind of habits die off, and we'll see what people's spending habits do in 2022.
Yeah. So Stephen, as Patricia was saying, a lot of the government support programs are potentially coming to an end. There's been some rumors as to whether or not they're going to keep up in some capacity or another. If they do in fact end, does the Canadian Chambers see that acting as it's going to have a big impact? Is it going to be a jolt, a dip, like a shock to the economy, or do you think it's something that will actually be managed quite well by the economy?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, as Patricia pointed out, that's going to be one of the key issues going forward. So the deadlines are fast approaching this week. Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Finances, has in an interview this week was just mentioning that they are internally looking at what will be done, and expectations are that there will be some types of extensions for some of these programs, as you mentioned, the wage subsidy, the rent subsidy, as well as the individual recovery benefits. It's unclear what mix and what balance that will be. We do have some evidence, indirect as it is, from the United States. So they had some enhanced unemployment benefits, and those ran out back in July. And so looking through the first couple labor market data releases after that, what people had hoped and what people were expecting in the United States is that you would see a bit of a pushback from workers who had maybe been holding back or had been supported, that they would have extra incentive to jump back in the labor market. And what you didn't see in the States through at least the first 2 months, in sort of August, September data, we didn't see this big bounce back people were expecting. And so the worry really is that we have workers that are a lot of long-term unemployed. So in Canada, there's about 400,000 workers right now who have been unemployed for 6 months or longer. And they had lost their jobs earlier, obviously in the pandemic. And so the worry is really people becoming unattached to the labor market, dropping out of the labor market. And we've seen, at least in the US, we've seen that reduction in terms of overall participation rates in the States. So luckily, Canada has done better. We've kept, I think, a lot more workers tied to the jobs that they had, and a lot of these government programs have been successful. So yeah, at the Chamber, we're expecting and hopeful that there will be some extension of the wage and rent subsidies, although I think we are getting to the point now in the pandemic, there's still a lot of uncertainty for businesses, a lot of uncertainty for households. And so it's possible that they could, instead of having a wider eligibility on that, they could narrow that down to, as we said, some of the hardest hit sectors. We know in the retail hospitality sector, output is still 50% below where it was before the pandemic. So sectors like that, even on the travel side, airlines and things, those have not anywhere near come back to normal. And so extending support government policy support to keep those businesses going that will be viable when things get back to normal. That's something which we think will be helpful, and hopefully that will get us through, into this next, past the fourth wave period where we can get back to kind of, safely and normally getting back to the office, staying back in school and with kids, and not having to avoiding a lockdown, which we know has been pretty catastrophic in terms of the impacts in earlier rounds.
Yeah, no, I should probably be a little better versed in this than I am, but it's just before we move into the labor shortage issue, let's just talk about the rent subsidies again for a second. I mean, it's my understanding that rent subsidies were not being given to the landlords, but were actually being given to the people who were the renters, and that some of that money's never actually made it to the renters, and they were unable, or to the landlords, unable to evict during this period. So do we have any idea, Stephen, if there's how big a problem that could be when those subsidies start to come off, because and those restrictions, because there could be some significant arrears that cause a fair bit of a shock to the system as businesses are really come to loggerheads with their landlords.
Well, the rent subsidy one, maybe David or Patricia might know a little bit more about them. Yeah, I haven't followed on the rent subsidy side as closely as maybe I should have, but I do know those situations you talked about between landlords and tenants. It's a much more complicated situation. People are usually locked into longer term lease arrangements, and it's a little bit more difficult to break those contracts. And so I just the rent subsidy itself is, again, maybe somebody else has a bit more color on that, but I think it's an area where we know, given a big change in terms of demand for commercial real estate, as an example, I'm sitting here in an office and it's completely empty, but for 4 people on an entire floor. We do know that demand for office space is changed quite considerably. A lot more people working from home, and so there's going to be a pretty large disruption. It's just that given the staggering of rent contracts, this will be playing out. It's not as though we just deal with this for a few months and then either new tenants come in or you break leases. These are much longer term, entanglements and more difficult to deal with. But again, maybe some of the other panelists know. I haven't really been too far into the weeds on any of the rent subsidy work.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm not sure if anybody else knows. My office is the same. I mean, there are 4 of us. There are 4 of us here in my office, and we're not anticipating, like currently in the office, I'm not anticipating everybody else to be it getting back to the full complement. We're going to be a hybrid office. But when it comes to the rent subsidies, does anybody have any reflections on whether or not there's vulnerabilities in the market from that perspective?
Yeah, the rent subsidy was a lot less than the wage subsidy, like obviously, but it was relatively new too. It was only introduced October 2020. Previous to that, there was the CERSA program, which was kind of tenants had to work with their landlords, and the landlords would reduce the rent, and then the landlords would get reimbursed for portions of the rent. But the CERS rent subsidy is applied to by the tenant based on rent paid. I mean, it could be sitting in a payable and they never physically made the payment, which is, I think, what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
But the program was set up initially to be like a reimbursement up to 75% of rent and other other incidentals in your contract. So if you were required to pay utilities or whatever, you could get a portion of that back. So I haven't heard many instances where the landlords aren't getting rent because it's based on reimbursement, but
Right. I was chatting with a large landlord just the other day, and they were saying that's potentially going to be a problem for them moving forward.
I mean, the one thing, John, just like vacancy rates, at least on the commercial side, overall vacancy rates have shot up quite a lot, and you see some of the bigger, let's say, financial insurance companies at the downtown Toronto. It does seem that there is a shift, if not to a full hybrid model or to a lot more people working from home. You did see in the Toronto area a lot of disbursement, and that put some pressure on housing prices where people were moving. I grew up in London, and we're back in London, and just got the sense that there were people moving farther and farther. It wasn't just the Golden Horseshoe, but it was pressures beyond Kitchener-Waterloo into Niagara region as well, where people had the expectation that yes, they could still make a good salary working a downtown Toronto office job, but they wouldn't be in the downtown Toronto office and wouldn't need to do the commute. And so I guess we have seen just a lot more vacancies in terms of downtown Toronto office space, and the downtown core. The Toronto Board of Trade has a recovery tracker that they've just put together and just put online in the last few weeks that I'm kind of looking over and have chatted with them about. It's pretty interesting when you look at the dynamics in terms of overall spending levels. There are some parts around the GTA that are back to normal, the distribution, warehousing kind of functions where Amazon work and others have just continued on in the pandemic. But then if you look at the spending that relies on the downtown, so people that are servicing office workers, the dry cleaners, the local cafeterias, those places, there just are not many people taking public transit. There are not many people working, and so there's been just a very large reduction in terms of demand for office space for sure.
Yeah, David or Patricia, what's your sense in terms of commercial real estate and office space here in Niagara? Are there a lot of vacancies? Are we experiencing the same kind of thing as they're experiencing in Toronto, for example?
I mean, even before the pandemic hit, like DJB has realized that the model of having all your people under one roof really provides better service. Instead of having like 10 people in one small office and 10 people in this small office, having people together really benefits. You have your best tax people, your best accounting people. It's better to train staff. So even before the pandemic, we had pulled out of Fort Erie, as everyone knows. So I mean, we still have a present, but we don't have a physical space there anymore. So I think the pandemic has maybe pushed that along for a lot of people, especially businesses that are adapting a hybrid model, and maybe not everybody has a dedicated desk. I know I have a lot of client base and I'm from Fort Erie, and there's a lot of commercial like office space available, even in Port Colborne where I live. A lot of commercial availability right now. Yeah.
David?
Yeah, we're kind of seeing the same thing that, Patricia just highlighted most of the things that are happening in Niagara. I just know in our building here, just recently, I mean, the parking lot is maybe half full, but up until then, it was like a quiet town. So I think that it's more the norm. And again, a lot of places, much the same as DJB, are kind of rethinking their operations and centralizing a lot of things. And I know at the BDC, we've gone to what's known as hoteling, where with the new hybrid model that we're looking at, you go in and book a desk for a day that you want to come in, and that type of thing. So I think that's kind of maybe going to be the way of the future, as far as, Stephen even mentioned the hybrid model and such. So if that's the case, then obviously I think people aren't going to need as much commercial space. So again, the new norm is uncertainty. That's all I can say.
and David, the dynamics can change as well too, because I know in certain offices, what you need is sort of the senior management presence back in the office. And then you do get people, I mean, obviously people have enjoyed the flexibility, but some people think that there may be, less likelihood of being promoted and moving up the corporate ladder if you're not getting the same face time. And so it is possible that you kind of see this cascading, where you get a couple senior people come back, and then you get some other kind of young and hungry people want to get some face time. They move back, and then the hoteling model or the hybrid model actually shifts. Not that we're going back to, nobody thinks we're going back to 5 days a week, but my point is, the expectations people had at the outset that I'm never gonna step foot back in an office ever again, and this will be great. I think we're seeing some limitations of that in terms of just people's ability to collaborate and be creative. I mean, we're doing this conversation here on Zoom, and that's great, but this is not the same thing in terms of being sitting together in a boardroom having the discussion. And I think people realize a bit of fatigue in terms of all the online activities, and some people are kind of just hoping to get back to that semi-normal area where people are kind of getting into the office, having the water cooler discussions, and just being back to, again, some kind of, even if it's not a 5-day-a-week normal, having some kind of coordination, so that if the hoteling model is, if I'm going to come in and look at my screen and have the same meeting I'm going to have in my son's bedroom where I had been working before, then there's no incentive to come back into work. However, if I've coordinated amongst my team of 5 people, And every Tuesday and Thursday, we all go back in the office and we're all working together and we're having meetings in boardrooms and talking and whiteboarding and brainstorming and stuff. I think you will see those types of models emerge.
Yeah.
And the people that have enjoyed the flexibility have sort of stopped the commute will enjoy that. But some will be drawn back in just mainly because dynamics that'll take place. And it'll be harder if you're not in the office to have, you're missing some of the meeting conversation, the sidebars and that kind of thing. So I guess my point is we're not going to see this shift back fully, but I think the initial plan that, the office is dead. I think we're probably going to see maybe 20 to 25 percent of hours will be done remotely, but probably the majority in terms of office jobs, this is, depends on the sector, but in terms of office jobs, I think we still probably will see a lot more in person. And this is not now, but let's say 6 months or once vaccination rates get to the point where it's safe to be in the office. Right now, our biggest constraint is the elevators and the bathrooms. This is in terms of high occupancy places. Those are the big issues. People are worried about taking public transit, but it's mainly getting into the buildings and then sort of general things like that.
Yeah, I think too potentially. So sorry, Patricia. I was just going to say, but potentially from the recruitment standpoint, I know, from my own perspective, as I'm getting into some new recruiting, I'm certainly going to be interested in people that are going to want to be in the office as opposed to people who want to be.
Well, that's the thing is I've hired some staff who I've never physically met, have worked for me out of Toronto, done remotely, and it's gone really well. But that is when you're able to compartmentalize the work and do sort of, let's say, research functions or consulting functions. It can work that way. But what a lot of these people are missing, kind of what I had early in my career, is you're sitting there and you're learning from other people in the office. Kind of you're in the meeting, but it's not your meeting, and you're watching how that meeting's going, the dynamics there. And for people now that are sort of stuck in their homes or stuck in an apartment building with other people working beside them, it's not the same dynamic. And while it can be more productive, it's not necessarily as enjoyable for people in terms of overall, getting joy out of work and being happy in terms of what they're doing.
Patricia, you were going to say something.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, DJB, we just opened it up for a flexible work arrangement. You apply for what you'd like what days you'd like to be in the office, what days you'd like to be at home. And if you don't apply for at least 3 days in the office, you aren't guaranteed a desk, like a dedicated desk. And just based on my conversations with staff and at both levels, like partners and below me, I think the appetite is to come in, and it's I was kind of shocked by that because not for me, I really like being in the office. We were one of the silly people that got a puppy during the pandemic, so I need to get away from him. So I like being in the office. So I just find that for my mental health, I need to be around people, and I think a lot of people are finding that too, that burnout that comes with being alone all day. So it's refreshing to see that a lot of people will be in the office, and I'm looking forward to having more people in the office as capacity increases, as vaccination rates go up. So that's...
Patricia, I loved working from home actually before. So I was in a previous job. I was a research director, and I was working in Montreal but living in Ottawa, going back and forth, and it was fabulous. And that was before I didn't have my wife sitting, the next door down, having conversations from 8 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. I didn't have my kids doing, Zoom school and other things. And I went from somebody who loved the remote work to now I'm like, actually, I would like to be in an office where I can close my door, I can sit down. I actually have a printer. I can print something off if I want to print something if I needed to.
Plan when you're going to print.
Basic things like that, where I'm like, actually, I think the work there is a benefit of having a desk that can move up and down and ergonomics and everything else. So,
but also when it's February and there's a snowstorm, I am going to love not having to go out in that.
Well, the hybrid model just results in everybody working from home Friday magically.
It was terrible to the realization that kids will never have a snow day though.
Yes.
It was virtual learn that day.
David, you had a comment.
No, I was just to say I agree with everything everyone obviously is saying. I think it's very important for the collaborative efforts of face-to-face meetings, because there are, like Steve mentioned, where there are certain dynamics that are lost on the Zoom call. So no, it is very important that people get back to the office. It won't be a full-time thing, as everyone has said, but again, from the mental standpoint, and you just can't beat what you learn, body language, things like that, being with people. So
and I think too, people, I mean, we are social creatures, and part of that, part of that social nature is also is work related. So, I do think that there's a sense of value and additional purpose and engagement that people get out of that kind of in-person working together component. That I think the hybrid model will probably be the model that evolves. But quite frankly, it'll probably evolve as a result of also just helping with work-life balance with what so many people are living with. I mean, I remember, I think I said this in a previous edition of this, that the first wave, everybody is, wow, this working from home thing is fantastic. Second wave was like, oh my God, get me back to the office. And then instead of the third and the fourth wave, it's just kind of where we're kind of adjusting to a bit of that again. What seems to be a lot of flux. So
the other thing, John, sorry to jump in, but the other thing we shouldn't forget is that, I mean, we are the privileged minority of people, because it's actually the majority of jobs. So only about 40% of jobs were able to be done remotely back in the first lockdown, and so 60% of jobs, the majority of people in construction and manufacturing jobs and transportation, and in any of the high touch service jobs that we talked about, those jobs cannot really be done at all remotely, and there is no option of staying home on Friday and working on your computer. It's really been something which is, for those who have the ability to work online and use a computer all day and do things remotely, it's great. But there's again, the majority of jobs in the Canadian economy and in most economies are not actually like that. So it's good for us to keep that in mind, that we're kind of in the privileged minority.
That's a really good point. And also, I sit here and I talk about DJB having this flexible arrangement model, but I forget to talk about like our admin staff. We're really like the heroes of our organization. They came in every day during the pandemic, and while we didn't have clients coming in, they were still there answering phones and being the people that move the ship forward. So yeah, we sometimes take for granted that sometimes our job is flexible, but we rely on our admin that can't be as flexible, and we're super grateful for that.
That's the perfect segue to talk about labor shortages and move into the labor market discussion, the broader labor market discussion. So Stephen, you had talked about some of those changes in the labor market, people leaving the market, people leaving their jobs, and different sectors, things coming back slowly. What are you experiencing, Patricia, from the DJB perspective as it relates to labor shortages? You hearing a lot about labor shortages from your clients?
Yeah, it's like it's the new weather topic. I think, like, you used to go into a meeting and you say, oh, the weather's nice, blah blah blah. Now it's like, oh, can you find staff? We can't either. Nobody can. So I'll be interested to see if these personal benefits run out, if that helps some of the problem. But
are there any sectors that you feel are being harder hit than other sectors from what you're hearing?
Oh, I think the service industry for sure.
Service.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you? What are you experiencing from BDC's perspective, or as it relates to labor shortages with your clients and customers?
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate enough, we're allowed to get out and do our business development, visit our clients and prospects and such, and it's at the beginning of the pandemic, it was obviously a financial concern, that type of thing. But as we move forward, now the number one topic obviously is I can't hire anybody, I can't find people to work, and more so in the service industry, I think. But people have to realize that there was a labor shortage kind of pre-pandemic as well. This has been going on for approximately 10 years, roughly, just because of aging population. And I think the pandemic just kind of, moved it ahead quicker, as people did. Like, there's what, kind of, we call the resignation group, that just a lot of people decided, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here, instead of maybe, 5 years from now or such like that. So, it's basically the pandemic has amplified the problem, and that's the number one concern of all business owners that I get out and see on a regular basis. So
Stephen, do you see these then as do you see these as structural changes happening to the labor market that we're going to have to learn how to adapt to, or do you see things, or do you just see it as a transition as the service sector starts to open up, and as the people spending habits start to level out and move a little bit more towards what they were pre-pandemic?
Well, I think David's right. Like you sort of have a couple things happening at the same time. So we have had chronic and structural long-term difficulties in terms of skill. So right now we have a lot of people that are looking to hire. So the job vacancy surveys at StatsCan, this is the highest number of people. If you look at Indeed job postings and any kind of indicator of labor demand is extremely high. So businesses want to hire workers. And on the other side, we do have an elevated, there's still 1.4 million unemployed people that are actively looking for work. So this is usually a situation where we should be finding people going from unemployed to employed relatively quickly, and yet we're not. And so I think what this suggests is there's a mismatch in terms of the skills that businesses are looking to hire on the market and the skills that people are bringing to those jobs. But as David pointed out, this is certainly exacerbated by the pandemic. So things like restaurants. So previously in restaurants, there's a high turnover, lower wage, more casual employment would happen in that type of job. And now people have either left that work, and then people are starting to kind of rethink, well, what is my long-term career trajectory in this industry, and do I want to be somewhere else? So I think part of this, again, is a mismatch between people are unemployed, but unemployed in sectors where the labor demand may be high, but we're not getting a lot of people come back. So you asked before some of the types of jobs, anything that's ICT related, anybody who's working with digital skills, those are in extremely high demand right now. At the same time, truck drivers, we've had difficulties getting truck drivers for a long time now. Construction work has been difficult. In the food service industry as well, just waiting in food service. Those are difficult jobs to fill right now. And so people have thought, well, why don't people just for businesses just pay a little bit more in terms of the wages, and that will clear the market. It seems to be the case in rural and remote regions that there just aren't people around. So if you're running a Tim Hortons and you're maybe in Humboldt, Saskatchewan, it's not likely that you're able to hire people. And one of the other gaps that has been used historically, which has come down a little bit, is immigrants, new Canadians that have come to the country. Those taps have been turned off mainly for pandemic reasons, and that's an area where people, for some of those newer, lower skill, lower wage type jobs, that pool of workers that has historically been able to step in and fill these jobs with relatively little training and come in and work. Those numbers have come down a lot. So the government's hoping to increase immigration and temporary foreign worker type jobs more, but this was held up a lot, mainly due to travel restrictions and safety restrictions of the pandemic. So we're sort of had this situation where you have some of these long-term structural issues, and then you layer on the pandemic, and we do have again more people coming out in certain industries with either teaching degrees or liberal arts degrees where there was less demand for those jobs, and more demand in construction, more demand in trades where we can't get people in the trades. So I mean, it's not new to the pandemic, but the pandemic has kind of really amplified the pressures that businesses are under to try to bring people in and keep talent that they need to run their businesses.
So there is a skills shortage, as David said. It was something that was certainly happening pre-pandemic, certainly in the building and construction trades. It was that there's been some long-term issues, and also looking forward, there's some issues. Immigration is potentially seen as a partial solution to the labor shortage. What other ideas might be on the table that might help alleviate the labor shortages that we're facing? Is anybody hearing anything?
I think from the BDC's perspective, I mean, we did a couple of surveys recently with about 1,200 entrepreneurs and about 3,000, Canadian workers, and we kind of came up with, or have identified, maybe 3 strategies to help mitigate the labor shortages. One of them being on, to take a look at new technologies that can be used to automate operations. to complete repetitive, easily replicable tasks. And therefore you can free up workers, for more value-added tasks and spend money on training them to do those things. The other thing is that, putting in place maybe a more formal hiring selection process. So you've got more of an organized procedure so that you reach the right pool of candidates, and then you're able to select one properly. And then obviously offering competitive salary and benefits. Flexible work arrangements are huge. Again, we just talked about working from home and hybrid models, and people are looking for that. So yeah, automation is probably the number one thing that came out of our surveys, that using any type of technology to help with some of the repetitive tasks, and firing out marketing programs and things like that, using software to automate sales projections and customer service and that such.
I was in a restaurant the other day that, believe it or not, had a little robot that was running around taking people to their tables and bringing food. Now, I think it was more gimmick than anything, but it certainly spoke a little bit to the future. It felt a little,
sure, definitely.
To be honest with you, we got a couple of interesting things going on in the Q&A and in the chat. So I thought it was why don't we bring a couple of those in? We have Fausto said that it's wrong to assume that immigrants bring low skilled work, given that the immigration process requires skills to qualify. So it's not made the statement that it's not a sustainable assumption. And
that's sorry, John, that was directed at me, but that's a fair statement to make. I was talking really more about temporary foreign workers and filling some of the gaps. So some of the areas there in agriculture where there were just programs that had been in place that were no longer in place, and that had caused some skill shortages. But no, in general, Canada's immigration policies and bringing in economic class immigrants, we have some of in competition with other countries, and we attract and are able to retrain some of the best in the world, and we do that well. The government really is, if anything, just trying to increase the caps on that, so we get 400,000 a year as opposed to what we had in the pandemic, which was just temporarily suspended or lower.
Right. We also in the Q&A, I've got a couple of questions here. So why don't we move on those? Susan asks, says the pandemic has changed the context for everything. Are you seeing a shift in thinking and decision making beyond the immediate hybrid remote work and workforce, etc., to adapt to the different contexts leaders and businesses find themselves for the long term, 5-10 years and beyond? Who wants to take that one? Who wants to take that one on? Patricia, what do you think?
I mean, I think a lot of the past 18 months has literally been survival and adapting to what's coming at us in real time. We're open, we're closed, we're at capacity, we're at lowered capacity. And I'm not sure I'm answering the question, but I know that I think what we're trying to achieve now is to see if any of these models will actually work and be sustainable. And I think what the businesses have learned in the last 18 months is just that we're more flexible and accommodating than we thought we were. I know, like, from the accounting side of things, like, people used to wear a suit and tie to the office 5 days a week. And now we have like dress for your day policies. Like, if you don't have a meeting, you can wear whatever you want. So I just think that we have learned to be adaptable. And I think that's what's going to carry us through the next 5-10 years, is just being able to implement policies, get people in place that are able to be flexible and still do your job. The other thing that I think just might need to come to the forefront a little bit more for every business is like supporting employees with burnout and mental health. Like, I don't think employers felt that was any of their business or concern in the past. And I, as like a senior member of my team, know that it is our problem. So I think that's something that we're going to have to adapt to in the next 5-10 years.
No question. We had a great session a couple of sessions ago on the responsibility that employers have to employees, and what was described by one of our panelists as what did she describe it as? She described it as the psychological contract, I think is what she described it. And there's a responsibility for employers to look after their employees, particularly from that work perspective. But David, what's your sense with the customers and that you deal with? Is anybody having any opportunity, taking the opportunity to do any long-term planning at this point, or again, are businesses more, as Patricia said, just trying to deal with the immediate circumstances, be responsive to what's changing day to day?
I think from my perspective, businesses are now looking, a little bit longer term. I agree with Trish that originally it was like a reactionary thing. So what do we do to get over this, et cetera, et cetera. Flexibility and adaptability, as Trish mentioned, they're going to be key moving forward in the years to come, because, as I mentioned before, uncertainty is going to be the new normal. So you've got to be able to be flexible and adapt on the go. What we're seeing with a lot of our clients is now that, BDC, obviously provides financing to commercial enterprises, but we also offer our advisory services, which many companies have been taking advantage. A lot of them for the adoption of technology and automation. We can help with that type of thing, but also with strategic planning and looking ahead. A lot of them now are assessing risks and maybe developing more contingency plans than they had to do in the past. So, because the supply chain issues, they're asking themselves, are we dependent on, one supplier? Are they in danger of closing? What happens if that, occurs? What do we do there? We need a contingency. Again, with the labor shortage, do I have employees that are critical and essential to the delivery of my product? What do I need to retain them? How do I get more like them? So yeah, in the long run, people are now looking farther ahead as opposed to just month by month to try and, get on top of this and again, develop some contingencies.
Yeah, so certainly. I mean, it makes sense that organizations would be doing a lot of risk mitigation right now, sort of based on how everyone was significantly, everyone was really caught very flat-footed, except for, I think, the Shaw Festival was one of the only organizations in Canada that actually had pandemic insurance. So wow. Which we heard about in another one of our editions, which was fantastic. But so we have a lot, maybe some of that longer term planning, to reduce the risk of natural disasters and or these kinds of circumstances. We at the same time have another significant challenge ahead of us, which is climate change. We have the government and governments worldwide wanting to trying to keep our warming of the planet under 1.5 degrees. We don't have a very long time horizon in order to do that. I'm not sure what the panel's feeling is. We seem to get a lot of noise and a lot of talk about it, but we don't quite seem to be getting that next level of action that I think might be required if we're going to actually achieve those goals. And then potentially, if in fact the climate does continue to warm, then that will ratchet up the needs and the requirements. Stephen, do you get the sense that organizations and companies are now starting to move into some longer range planning? Or are they just mostly still dealing with the immediate living in the moment of the pandemic? And I guess B, are you feeling that climate change mitigation and adaptation is part of that planning? Sorry, that's a big question.
Yeah, big question, sir. I had a little small piece on the start that we'll see if I can tag on to what David and Patricia said. But I think you're right. Initially, it was kind of shock and awe, this crisis moment where we shut the economy down overnight, and so people were really dealing with, how do I keep my business running? How do I pay my bills? We have had, again, we're now in the fourth wave of this. So I think you're right. We've been through this drill before. And I think what that has allowed people to do is to really rethink everything. To really rethink, why am I going into my office? Why do I need to be wearing my suit and tie today? Can I go in? Can this be done virtually? They're rethinking pretty fundamental assumptions. And there's an analogy which I think is interesting from the London Tube, the subway. Was shut down several years ago. There was a terrorist attack on the subway, which is obviously a very terrible thing, and people had their normal routes where they went and they took this route to get there. There was some research that was done on that, which showed that as the subway was closed for 3 days, people started to do new things. So instead of like just walking like an automaton to this route and standing there and getting in the tube and going this way, people would ride their bike. People would look around traffic and start taking different approaches to things. And that's what this pandemic has been. It's been a shock to every business model. Think about somebody who's running, who was running the restaurant. Well, now people want to buy food, but people can't come in to sit down and eat the food. Well, this whole DoorDash, door delivery, thing that had been happening before, people were just figuring out ways around these constraints. And in some cases, they've actually been an improvement. And so I do think that the longer term thinking now is at a point where people are rethinking kind of their career aspirations, what they want between their work-life balance, and companies are thinking about, is the way that we've always done business the right way to do business? Or if we listen to our customers, if we experiment, you have a portfolio approach, and on the margin at the chamber now, we are looking at making some bets in different directions in different areas, and that's what a lot of other companies have done, and looking to scale up with digital technologies and catch a wave but see what works. So I do think you're going to see a lot more experimentation going forward, and a lot more just open thinking in terms of just because we had done it this way for 10 years before COVID comes along and just blows that business model up. You kind of you rebuild it from basic principles. You don't go back to what you had before. The other part of your question was on climate change. And I think you're right. In Canada, we depend to a large extent, especially in terms of our overall trade and in terms of our overall economy in the prairies and in Newfoundland as well, particularly on those jobs in the energy sector and in the oil patch in particular. And so financial markets are pushing companies, financial institutions and others that are looking to raise capital are being asked to just have better accounting and better standards and sort of explain their impacts on the planet and their supply chain impacts. So I think that's an overall trend which every company is feeling, whether they're a local mom and pop or whether they're a big company looking to raise money on the TSX. And so every company is kind of looking at ways that they can do things. So we had in a survey with StatsCan, the Canadian Survey on Business Conditions, we asked about environmental practices. And that's an area where I think I was somewhat surprised to see the majority of companies are undertaking, there's a variety of different measures that we looked at, but the majority of companies are doing something. They either are wanting to do so because they feel like it's good for business, it will reduce their costs, reduce their impact on the environment, reduce their pollution. They want to do something, but I think we're seeing a pretty big gap between the very small companies and the very large companies. So this is an area where probably the bigger companies with more resources are going to be leading the charge. And one of the things we need to be careful of in Canada is just being aligned with international standards, because right now on all the ESG metrics, we have a lot of different people doing different things, but there's not a lot of coordination in terms of harmonizing across. I mean, obviously the US is our biggest trading partner, so we need to be aware of the standards that they're using and working with them. But so I think you've seen a lot of action on climate change. You're going to see a lot more action. The net zero getting there, like the turnover that we've seen in terms of auto fleets from very little electric vehicles to now by 2030, some of the majors saying that they're not going to be selling anything that's not an EV, no more combustion engines going forward. I think that's a transition that everybody's kind of chasing, and the clock is ticking. But I think we're going to see some pretty profound changes in the way business is done in the next decade.
Yeah, really interesting. I think I agree. I think there's a gap between the very large and then the small and medium sized enterprises in terms of just they're just trying to do what it is they're trying to do. The big kind of structural changes are going to be maybe something that actually get pushed through the supply chain as the large companies work to get their emissions down and work on their financial disclosures, that there's a requirement that pushes down into your supply chain. So I'm not sure, David, what are you feeling out of BDC as it relates to your customers and clients, and whether or not they're starting to deal with the longer term implications of climate change?
It's honestly, it's not really the forefront of a lot of our clients. I mean, it's important, and some of our studies have shown that a lot of Canadian entrepreneurs, they're committed to reducing their environmental impact. And from our most recent study or survey, it shows that 54% of them have kind of labeled themselves as being in transition. So I don't know exactly specifically what that entails, but I think it's at the forefront because it is so, it's in the media, it's a global thing now. And it's something they're working towards. So again, you made the comment that maybe we're not getting there as quick as we would like, but we are seeing, a lot of business owners kind of rethinking their process and, trying to maybe improve efficiencies or those processes in order to accommodate and, identify any kind of environmental changes they can make to make it obviously a better world.
Is that a risk that BDC is bringing to the attention of your customers and clients in your consulting services, for example? I mean,
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We have programs in place to help identify and maybe speed up that transition to putting a plan in place. Kind of where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years, and then you work backwards to get them there using the most up-to-date and available resources to help with that.
Yeah. What about from DJB's perspective, Patricia? What are you feeling as one of those kind of longer term significant events that keeps rolling slowly towards us? Are you getting any kind of a sense that your clients are paying any heed that doing something about climate change is their responsibility, and are they acting?
Sometimes I get asked if there's grants available, like government grants with respect to like climate change initiatives. But past that, my conversations aren't really driven by that sort of thing. I mean, it's all a lot of bottom line stuff. So if it's gonna cost extra money to change, it might not be something they're interested in doing right now. So a lot of times they're looking like, is there government like immediate expensing or something like that, or government grants? So that's kind of the extent of where my conversations with my clients go.
Right. So significantly shorter term than kind of like the 2030 time horizon, that when we're supposed to be down, what, 50%?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Stephen, what about the Canadian Chamber of Commerce? What's your organizational view as it relates to climate change? Are you encouraging companies to participate in meeting our national objectives and global objectives?
For sure, John. Yes, we are. I'm
relatively. It wasn't an accusatory question.
No, it wasn't a leading question either. No, I'm relatively new at the chamber here. I've only been in this position for about a month at this point now, so I'm getting caught up to speed on our net zero. We have a net zero council. There's a lot of work that's going on at the chamber on these issues, but as I mentioned before, some of the things that I think that we're looking for just more traction on, more progress on, is more government leadership in terms of standardization of some of these just main metrics. Because again, for companies trying to raise funds, it's going to be very difficult if we don't have things that we can compare across sectors and across countries. That's one of the areas Patricia mentioned as well, that companies, particularly smaller companies, are looking, they want to be part of the solution. They want to move to a net zero future, but they are feeling like some of these investments that they're going to make need to be recognized in a different way by governments. So, before we had tax credits for various things, that there could be, a net zero accelerator fund where it's not only the largest major, emitters, but also smaller companies that could as well have some help on the bottom line when they undertake these practices.
Yeah, and yes, I did ask that question in a way that was going to hopefully result in the answer that you gave us. So
good. Now I passed your test then.
wasn't a test, I promise. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I'm going to let's just wrap up quickly around the table with the final with one of the questions that we have in our Q&A. Interested in what each of the panelists know or think various levels of government should be doing in order to help boost our economy. If everybody just takes a couple of 30 seconds, then we'll only be a little late. David, what do you think?
I know from the B2C's perspective, the government in budget 2021 put out the Canada Digital Adoption Program, and there are no particulars yet. It's in the works, but they're putting, I think, 1.4 billion into this program and another 2.6 billion that the BDC is going to administer as a zero interest loan to help companies obtain automation and technology. And because the federal government believes that that's kind of the wave of the future that will, address some of these labor shortages and such and get the economy going. There's 1.1 million businesses in Canada and only about half of them have a website. So, based on globalization and all that such, 500,000 Canadian companies are basically invisible to the world and partners online for selling and issuing their products and services. So with this Canada Digital Adoption Program, just keep your ears open and your eyes peeled for some more information coming on that. We're excited to be partnered with that, and it's going to be good for everyone.
Thanks, Patricia. Just very quickly, what do you think government should do to boost the recovery?
I think it just making credits or subsidies or whatever capacity accessible to the industries that need it, looking at getting people back to work off some sort of EI and maybe passing that along to the employers as training and hiring subsidies, and just stimulating spending. I know right now they've introduced immediate expensing on a lot of capital assets, which is going to incentivize people to start spending money on big infrastructure and investing in their own companies. So stimulate the economy.
Stephen.
I'll be quick because I know we're at time. So I think the first should acknowledge the government has done a great job. There was no playbook for how to deal with COVID, and the overall levels of support that we've seen have gotten the economy through the worst. What we're looking at the chamber is really more the shift from a government push, a government focus and stimulus side actions to more business-led recovery now. So we still see the private sector lagging behind the public sector in terms of the impacts coming through COVID. So really more, I think that as we started off at the outset, where things are at, we are at a point where expectations of growth are improving. There's still a lot of uncertainty, but people are feeling like this year is going to be better than last year, and 2022 is going to be better than 2021. So there's lots of opportunities, and hopefully we can get focused back on economic growth and get back to a more normal situation.
Terrific. Thank you very much. That's all the time that we have. I would like to thank David Csordas, Senior Account Manager from Business Development Bank of Canada, Patricia Suess, Senior Manager for Durward Jones Barkwell, and Stephen Tapp, the Chief Economist for the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. The terrific insights. Really appreciated the discussion. Enjoyed it a lot. Our next session will be on October the 26th. I think that's next Tuesday. And our panelists will include, we're talking about local, what are we talking about? We're talking about challenges and opportunities experienced in their businesses going forward from a local perspective. We have Mike Konderka from Enviro, Niagara, Hearth and Barbecue, Clayton Lerno from Custom Sign and Angela Redicop from Greaves Jams. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, panelists, and appreciate your time. Take care.
Thank you, John.
A lot of fun.
Bye.
Thanks. Okay.
Bye-bye.